And we are live. Now, that's my first live stream. So guys, please, if you have any problems, you don't see me, the screen disappears, or you don't hear me, write this into chat. I will occasionally check it. And hi, Piotr. Glad you joined the stream. And I will make sure to fix that. So, why are we here? There is this application by Google called Android Developer Summit application. And this application is being advertised as kind of a template, kind of a showcase for the best practices and the latest trends in Android architecture, design, and various libraries. And given the publicity that this application gets, it's open source, by the way, I think it's a valid question to ask whether it's a good application and what can we learn from it, and whether there are some maybe not that good practices that it employs that we should be aware of, or at least we need to know about the trade-offs involved in some of this stuff. So that's the reason why I decided to do this live stream. I will go and review this application, and you will see it in live. You will see all the fuck-ups that I'm going to do. And you will also have a chance to comment and basically help me, or maybe correct me if I miss something. So hopefully it will be interactive for you and not just sitting and watching me doing something. So, said all that, let's start. First of all, where do you get the source code of this application? If you Google for basically Google I/O application source, you will find this repository, Google I/O Scheduler. And I/O Scheduler is the application that Google releases each year before their annual Google I/O. Well, you don't see my screen. Why are you not saying that? You don't see it. Now you do. So that's the repository that you should find, Google I/O Scheduler. And every year, Google updates this application to incorporate the latest and the greatest trends. And the last one was, well, basically the last year, I/O Scheduler 2019. And that's the source code of this application. Now, we are going to review basically Android Dev Summit application. And Android Dev Summit is built on top of I/O Scheduler. So if I go here, and that's the source code of I/O Scheduler, I already copied it, I already cloned it to my local repository. So if you go here and you'll find master branch, that's basically the I/O Scheduler itself. But if you look for remote branches, you will see this ADD Scheduler and ADD Scheduler 2019. So I believe that this one is the one that we should basically review. Therefore, let's check out this branch. And now, well, when I'm on this branch, I will go to Android Studio. And basically, just for being on the safe side, I will clean this project. And then I will rebuild it to make sure that everything generates, etc. Because some stuff like Dagger setup, if you don't generate, if you don't build your project, then you will get some reds inside your code, some errors about missing generated files. So I want to make sure that we have everything generated up until now. Yes, cool. Now it's finished. So let's start reviewing this application. Oh, I forgot. Before that, let's understand whether this application is big, small, medium-sized, what's going on with it. So to understand that, I will basically take a look into settings Gradle file. And here I can find basically all the modules that are present in this code base. And this application is modularized, so we have all these modules. And now what I want to do, I want to invoke a tool which is called clock, count lines of code. It stands for count lines of code. And this tool will tell me how many lines of code this application has. But I don't want to invoke this tool on basically all the folders and all the code inside these modules, I want to do the following. I want to find here all the directories that have source in their name. So I get this, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 directories named source. But I see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're just 5 modules. Therefore, one of these directories is not a module, and that's the directory that is not a module. Basically, it is kind of a module, but it's not a module that is used in this application. Therefore, I want to exclude this specific directory. So a little bit of command line magic. I already created this command to not basically waste your time on that. And when I execute it, it will tell me that basically Android Dev Summit application has 12,000 lines of Kotlin code, 6,000 lines of XML, and some JSONs, some HTMLs, and even a little bit of Java. In total, we are talking about application roughly 20,000 lines of code in size. Now, 20,000 is not a big application. It's actually a relatively small application. However, there are many business applications and probably well, I wouldn't say most, but many applications on your devices that you are using daily and you love them, they will be in this range. Therefore, while it is small application, it's actually in the range of applications that you are using. So you can write, I don't know, flashlight application with much less lines of code than that. And you can probably write some media player applications of this size, etc. So it's a small application, but not a trivial one. And that's exactly the size which will be relatively easy to review. I'm not sure that I will have the time to review it entirely, but I will do my best. So 20,000 lines of code, a small but not trivial application. And now we want to find the main module. And to find the main module, I want to basically go and look for in which module we get Android plugin, Android application plugin. Yep, apply plugin Android application. And I come to this build.gradle file inside mobile module. So mobile is basically the top level application, and it will use all other modules in this application in some manner. Let me just to pick into the chat. It's nice, great. Okay, so we are fine. Let's go. No, there's not much to see probably inside this build.gradle. So we use a lot of Kotlin. Well, sure, it's latest and greatest. And we use save args for navigation component. That's basically a plugin that generates, again, code generator that generates code to basically pass, when you navigate between screens, you can pass some arguments, and this plugin makes it type safe to do that. I don't like it, but we will see how it's used. Okay, nothing very special. There is not much configuration here. In big applications, you can find a lot of flavors, different flavors. Here we have just release, debug, and staging build types, and that's all. It uses data binding. Okay, Kotlin options, signing config. All right, and a bunch of libraries that this application uses. Well, I guess we will find everything here, all the latest tools. Dagger, basically Dagger Android, and the one that I don't like. And actually, during Android Developer Summit, Google already told us that finally they realized that Dagger Android wasn't a very good idea. So there's something new coming out. I think we've got some hints about how it will look. It's called Hilt, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Haven't got a chance to look at that yet. So just remember, we will deal with Dagger Android, which is not a recommended approach anymore. Glide, Fabric, Firebase, 3.10 ABP, basically Jake's library for working with dates. And if I'm not mistaken, just lately I saw some thread on Twitter that says that starting with some Android Gradle plugin, maybe latest Android Gradle plugin, we already know how to desugar basically Java 8 date and time APIs without any external libraries, which is really cool. It means that you can basically write code that you will write using Java 8 in Android without adding these additional libraries. Very cool. Okay, Kotlin std.lib, a lot of instrumentation tests. I'm not very good in instrumentation testing, so don't ask me about that. Some stuff about unit testing. So they use Mockito Kotlin by Nick Hamcrest, pretty standard, and JSON. By the way, I'm not sure what's the status of JSON in Android ecosystem today. On the one hand, it's widely used, and I also use it. On the other hand, like the most respected developers in Android community already recommend to avoid it and use Moshi instead. So that's a very interesting question, whether the next application that Google releases will still be using JSON or they will transition to Moshi. I personally use JSON, I think, in most of my projects, so I have no problem with that. As I told you, no surprises inside this build Gradle, so maybe let's move and find the manifest of this mobile module, this one. Let me just check the chat for a second. Yeah, Hilt, yes. So Kotlin, okay, thanks Gabor. Are you against data binding or for it? Obviously based on view binding being available now. Where I've always been against data binding, actually I can show you even how far back my my opposition to data binding goes. So if I Google Stack Overflow Android architecture, yep, this one, maybe MVC. I have an answer here. Let me just find it for a moment. Where's my Mozilla? So basically I predicted that data binding will not become widespread, will not become a standard tool for Android development back, well, basically the moment I saw it pretty much. And even when I was a paid developer and was full-time developer at a company, we used my implementation of MVC, and some developer, when data binding came out, several developers wanted to basically use data binding, and I was strongly opposed to that. So basically I'm very against data binding, and it's old. So I have this answer to this question. Yep, which architecture patterns used on Android? And somewhere here, okay, so I made this, the answer was updated November 2016. So it was about 3 years back, 3 and something years back then. And I said, however, there is one prediction I can make with a high degree of confidence: usage of the data binding library will not become an industry standard. I'm confident to say that because the data binding library in its current implementation provides short-term productivity gains and some kind of architectural guideline, but it will make the code non-maintainable in the long run. Once long-term effects of this library will surface, it will be abandoned. So the fact, my prediction about being abandoned is not yet came true, but I believe it's on its way there, because many people use data binding in order to avoid writing find view by IDs. And as this commenter who asked this question, monkey number 9. So monkey number 9, yeah, as you said, there is a view binding mechanism now, and basically view binding takes out this ability to avoid find view by ID calls, from data binding without bringing in all the additional complexity. So I do believe that data binding will become less and less common in Android. It's not common even today, but it will become less popular, and one day it will basically die, as it should, because in my opinion it wasn't a very good experiment to begin with. Alright, let's continue. So inside the manifest, why do I look at manifest? Because I want to understand the high level structure of this application. First of all, we have this main application class. Everything else is not that interesting. And now I want to find this main launcher activity, this one. Well, unsurprisingly, it's called launcher activity. And there is all kinds of stuff here. Not sure what's that, to be honest. URL handling and instant app auto verification. I haven't worked with instant apps, so probably a little bit not for me to explain what it means. And then we have main activity. Well, that's basically the main entry point to the application. And we have onboarding activity, to receivers, and stuff for metadata. Now, please note that even though Google recommends single activity architecture today, and they have this navigation component, etc., this application actually uses at least 3 activities. Well, exactly 3 activities, unless there are activities in other modules, of course. So we have launcher activity, main activity, and onboarding activity. And what I see from here is that they don't use one single activity approach. They used what's called activity per flow approach. And that's also the approach that I actually use in most of my applications. So you have one kind of main activity and it handles most of the application, but for some very specific flows, you extract additional activities because, well, there are various reasons. And one of them is that it's kind of tricky to build fragment navigation if you want to basically have kind of a flow. You have a flow inside your application, and then you want to implement something like login flow, which is on top of the basic flow inside the application. And whenever you exit the login flow, be it with successful login or by canceling, you want to come back to your main flow to exactly the same point where you left. So these kind of flows, they're more easily implemented using activity per flow approach, and that's what is used here. Also allows you to kind of use different activity flags, use different settings for your activities if you want one of them to be some kind of an immersive mode without status bar, etc. So that's very common, and that's what I actually also use. So just be aware that this single activity approach is not really single activity. It's kind of one activity for most of your application, and then you strategically extract additional activity whenever you need them. Single activity is recommended by Google, Reish says. Everything activity does, a fragment can as well. Theoretically, yes. In practice, I found that to be not... maybe you can do with fragments everything you can do with activities, but I found that to be more difficult than just use additional activities for specific flows. So again, if you're fine with single activity and everything else is a fragment, go for it. In some cases, having this launcher activity as an entry point to the application is easier, especially if you need to do stuff like maybe deep linking, etc. Maybe you want to have immersive splash screen, all kinds of reasons. And in my experience, it was easier to implement using multiple activities. I'm not insisting on that. Okay, let's see the implementation of this launcher activity. That's the first activity in this application. Well, it's very, very simple. All it has is this view model, launch view model, which we obtain from view model provider, of course. And then we have launch destination. We observe this destination. God, It says if destination is main activity, then we go to main activity, and if destination is onboarding, then we go to onboarding. And then we just finish the launch activity. But the question is, how does who decides whether it's main activity or onboarding? So let's see that. Launch destination. Can I please see launch destination? Is basically a property inside this launch view model. Okay, we have onboarding completed result, which is live data, and it basically just emits from onboarding completed use case, and then we go and map this result, and we say that its data is false. Then we launch onboarding, and well, to be honest, I get the feeling that this code is much more complicated than it should be, but let's see. We've got this launch destination enum, and what's interesting now is to see this onboarding completed use case. And onboarding completed use case gets preference storage, use default coroutine dispatcher. By the way, that's well, how it's called? It's called named injection. Why, I forgot about qualifier. Yeah, qualified injection. So you define qualified qualifier annotation, and then you can use, for example, Dagger. They use Dagger to inject different dispatchers. But since all coroutine dispatchers basically they are coroutine dispatchers, even though they are different, you need to somehow let Dagger know that there are several different implementations of them, and that's why you use this qualifier annotation. So we get default coroutine dispatcher, and then whenever this use case is executed, we go to preference storage and basically just fetch onboarding completed. And that's the interface, the implementation by Boolean. Well, I believe it just goes to shared preferences and reads one single Boolean preference. And then the question that I have a question here. We have onboarding completed use case, which is basically single line. And then we have view model, which basically doesn't do anything here. And then we have the activity, which received something from view model and then starts other activity. And well, basically, as far as I can say, all of that can be simplified to something like the following. Late init var, what preferences storage, right? Preferences storage, preferences storage of type preferences storage. Sorry guys, by the way, I'm not very proficient with Kotlin. I write most of my code in Java, so I'm going to do all kind of silly mistakes. Please feel free to write in chat and make fun of me and tell me what's the better way to use Kotlin if I screw something up. Yeah, Gabor, you are right. Exactly. That's what I'm going to show right now. So basically, what you want to do is to do the following: if preferences storage onboarding completed, then start activity this, else start activity that, and in any case finish this one. I'm pretty much sure that that's the logic that is being implemented using this additional view model and then use case. So no, Eric, there is Kotlin. This application is written in Kotlin. So no refunds. Sorry guys. Now, there's, even though like all this additional complexity with view model and this use case basically amounts to just 4 lines of code, and I'm sure that there's Kotlin way to write it in 3 or even 2 lines of code. Let's talk about standardization, because there's something to be said about using standard approach. So it's not uncommon in my applications. When I write code, I have very simple screens, and I still do like full MVC approach. I extract a view and I extract that. It's not uncommon. But so, and why do I do that? Because some developer who onboards on this application, and even myself in the future, it's much easier to read code that is standardized. That's everything is standardized, and you don't need to think. You don't need to basically understand several different approaches. So there's something to be said about standardization. Therefore, for example, if you use view models, you use MVVM, and this application uses MVVM, I would say that using this view model, additional view model, is justified. So I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to restore this functionality. However, once I have this view model, I really don't need the additional this use case. There's really no need for that. So in my estimation, this can be removed. And just it's interesting whether this use case is used anywhere else. No, don't look. They mean no usages. Do you want to find? Okay. I've just wrote a post about how to write use cases in Java, and I promise to write next week, maybe in 2 weeks, post about how to write use cases in Kotlin. In either Java, in Kotlin, whichever you use, please don't do that. Don't extract base classes for your use cases. And you can extract them. For example, in my post, I showed that I have base class for observable, for basically implementing observer design pattern, because that's kind of a common logic. But don't make this method don't extend this method. Then don't override. Don't make here, where is that? Don't make this protected abstract execute method, because then it makes it very difficult to read the code. So for example, now I want to understand where this onboarding completed use case is being executed, and it asks me, do you want to find usages of the base declaration? I do not want to find usages of the base declaration, because base declaration is used in many different use cases, every use case that inherits it. So I say no, and it says, well, then it's not invoked anywhere. And if I say yes, then I get, what's going on here? Well, I can't find it. Maybe it's my mistake, but I just can't find it. And I do want to understand where this onboarding completed use case is being used. So let's again find this one, and generated code, I'm not interested. So we have launch view model and launch view model test. So this use case is not even used in any other place inside the application, which is really reasonable, because it's onboarding completed use case. You would expect that to be invoked just in one single place. So the existence of this use case is not justified, in my opinion. All this additional complexity doesn't need to be here. You want to use view model for standardization, that's all right. No need to go the extra step. So don't over-engineer that. And I know that some of you will say, well, Google engineers, when they wrote that, they weren't sure whether there will be additional destination, whether the flow will change. Yes, that's probably true. But again, if you are not sure, you don't add additional abstractions. You don't prepare for something that you are not sure about. That's over-engineering, and many bad things happen when you do that. So use the simplest solution that works, as long as you keep some kind of standardized approach. So view model in this case is justified. Additional use case, probably not. All right, let's see. Well, guys, you write too many comments. Sorry. At least I'm not the only one who writes more Java. No, you are not the only one. In fact, I'm sure that it's still more than 50% Java in Android ecosystem. There's just simply 10 years of Java legacy, or maybe 8 years of Java legacy. It's not going to disappear, and it's not going to be converted to Kotlin in 1 or 2 years. You can simply use saved instance to restore the Boolean value of the complete instantiating view model in the case of configuration changes. Once again, view model here is not for configuration changes. There's nothing to be kept here on configuration changes. There's nothing. View model here is used as a controller. Okay. There's MV model view controller architecture pattern, and there's model view presenter, and there's model view view model. And the overlap between them in most cases is almost like 90%, maybe more. So all of them solve the same problem, and the difference is really not that important. It's in details. Specifically, when you use Google's view model to implement controllers, okay, that's this view model, that's just controller. To implement controllers, you also get configuration changes support. Maybe we will get a chance to talk about that later. But in this case, it's not used, it's not needed. So, and in fact, in my estimation, again, I wrote a post about that, I think this configuration change stuff is way overrated, way overrated. You can handle it very great with just save instance state, and in many cases you don't even need to handle that because, for example, standard UI components restore state by themselves. So it's not related to that. Okay, Mike Gerunov says use case unit boolean is useless. We already have unit to boolean. Yeah, I think we had this discussion on Twitter whether like functional approach is better. I still like object orientation. I like having objects, but in this case maybe yep. There's no data to survive configured. Yep, exactly. View models allows unit testing. Yes, just like any other standalone controller that you might implement without view model. Simplicity often scales better than over abstraction, says Gabor. Yes, simplicity always scales better than over abstraction, I would say. Sometimes I see legacy code and you look into that and there is no architectural guidelines. There are no these fancy libraries. They use async tasks all over the place, but the developers who wrote simple code. And maybe they kind of tried to do some kind of object orientation and segregate functionality into classes. And this code is relatively easy to read. I mean, it's not easy to read in the sense that when you look at 1,000 or 2,000 lines of code class, it takes you a lot of time to find yourself and understand the overall flow, but there are no tricky parts. You know, the code is simple, it's easy to read, it's just a matter of time. And this application, like I'm looking literally at 3 lines of code here, and it took me several minutes to understand what it does, etc. It's not justified. Again, you know, they say you read code 10 times more, you spend 10 times more time reading code than writing it. So always optimize for readability, and simplicity is the best for readability. Why would you prefer UI to unit tests? I wouldn't. I always prefer unit tests. I almost never do UI tests. So not me. There's no difference between function and objects. Functions are objects. Okay. Let's not get down that rabbit hole right now. So after we saw all that, I want to basically go and review the implementation. Let's see, how about time? We've just started. I have plenty of time. So let's deep dive into the main activity. I believe that this is the core of this application. By the way, disclosure, I know how IO scheduler, basically Google's IO application is structured because I reviewed its code. And therefore I feel relatively comfortable navigating inside this code base because it's pretty similar, or at least it looks similar to me because I reviewed iOS scheduler a couple of months ago. So if you think like, how can I so quickly jump in the code and understand where are the important parts, it's probably because I've already seen the iOS scheduler implementation, and this one should be very similar. Yep. This sounds like a cool idea, Thiago. Me and Gabo reviewing code. Well, if this format will be interesting to you guys and Gabor will agree to do that, it will be a huge huge honor to me to review code with you, Gabor. By the way, Gabor probably well, yeah, I can say that I don't know any other developer who knows about life cycles of basically Android companies more than Gabor. So whenever he says something about life cycles, I take it for granted. Okay, main activity, we have snack bar message manager. Okay, view model factory. Well, that's the standard because we are using MVVM. Not we are using, Google is using here. And we have current nav controller, which is live data that returns nav controller. Interesting. We'll look into that. That seems unusual. And of course we have data binding. So this binding is from here. In onCreate method we create our view model. That's okay. And then we observe the theme. Why we observe the theme? Because we can update the theme. Dark light system battery. Okay, cool. So this application supports different themes, and that's what we do here. And then we have data binding, of course, and then we have something about request that our window is laid out full screen to draw edge to edge. See the following blog post for more info. Gesture navigation going edge to edge. Well, I don't remember reading that blog post. I don't have time now. But once again, that's what I told you. Why do you use multiple? Might you want to use multiple activities? Because then you can play with all kinds of flags and all kinds of properties, which, well, either you can do on fragment level, or it will be just more cumbersome. I'm a little bit surprised that they make main activity kind of full screen and not launcher activity. Usually it's the other way. Your launcher activity, you want like to show your placeholder on the full screen, and then you want to revert back to standard layout, but they decide to do that. And then if saved instance state is null, this basically means this activity is launched for the first time and not after either configuration change or process death. So whenever this activity launched on the first time, we set up bottom navigation bar. And here's the command, says that if we are not launching it in the first time, it should be done in on restore instance state. That's interesting. Smells like a workaround to some very nasty lifecycle back to me. And then we basically instruct our controller, which is like view model again in this case, to refresh conference data. Okay, it's reasonable, but I always recommend to do this kind of stuff. Well, we'll look into that. It depends on the implementation, but usually this kind of stuff you want to do that in onStart and not in onCreate. Let's see, maybe they do that in onStart. It's not even overridden here inside main activity, so they don't do anything in onStart. So they refresh conference data during onCreate. And what it means is that if the application goes to background for a prolonged period of time, and applications can remain in background for days, I don't know, weeks maybe, and then user comes back, they will not refresh this data. Therefore, I always recommend to put that in on start, so when your user comes back to your application, the data will be refreshed, and user will not look at stale data from a couple of days or weeks ago. And one additional thing that I want you to note here is that the architecture is already kind of cracking, because, well, if you follow like proper model view something approach, model view model in this case, then view model is the controller. View model should contain business logic. View model should control the flow of the application. And Google designates this activity as kind of view UI layer. So it contains UI elements, and view model is the controller. And here we see basically that UI layer, basically the view, tells the controller to refresh data. So again, it's not a very big problem in this case, but eventually what it does is that you don't have a single point of control, single component that controls your application. Basically, the flow of control goes from here to there once you are a slave and once you are a master. And again, that's not something which probably affects much this application because it's relatively small. But if you write big complex applications, I recommend investing a little bit more thought into architecting and separating these responsibilities more cleanly. Because currently, like, well, in onCreate we tell it to refresh, and if we don't tell this view model to do something, probably it won't do anything. So not very good design in my estimation. Okay, and then again, in onCreate we subscribe to navigate to user attended dialog action, and then we open attended dialog. Okay, well, I'll get back to that. That's a very tricky point, and that's basically, this is one of the main reasons I don't use view models. I don't use like Google's view model architectural component. I don't like it. I think it's actively harmful, and this kind of stuff is the main reason why I think that. We'll get back to it when we review this view model. Now, what I'm interested to see is this one. Remember this one? They set up a bottom navigation bar first time here, and then they say otherwise it happens in onRestore instance state. And usually when you do that, you don't even need to override this method. Well, most applications don't override this method, and I actually don't like it. I don't remember why, but I had problems with this method, so I don't like it. Whenever I see that, I become very suspicious. But let's understand why they need to do that here. Now that bottom navigation bar has restored its instance state and its selected item ID, we can proceed with setting up bottom navigation. Okay. So this bottom navigation bar is some kind of stateful component by itself, and therefore probably its state is restored after this code is executed. Therefore if you would do that here always, like if it's not null, yeah, if it's not, basically you need to set up navigation bar probably in either case. Yeah, but if it's not null, if you come back from process dev, for example, then they say that you need to restore this bottom navigation bar here. That's a huge code smell for me. That's something that I would work days to not plant something like that in my application, because this is so non-evident. And well, this application, they don't maintain it much, because basically they work on it for a couple of months before Google I/O, and after Google I/O they forget about it for the rest of the year. But if that will be some kind of fast-moving application that requirements change, and tomorrow your designer comes and says, well, we thought about that, let's change that, and product manager says, we know, like, I don't like this bottom bar, let's try upper tabs, let's try navigation drawer, whatever, then code like this is something that bites you in the ass very hard down the road. It might take a year, 2 years, but at some point you just I'm, at least me, at some point I'm always really sorry for planting this kind of code, this kind of workarounds. So I'm not sure why they need this bottom navigation bar to be stateful. I really don't understand. In my estimation, bottom navigation bar should just be simple custom view that you put several buttons there. I never use Google's libraries for that. I don't know why would anyone do that. It's just custom view, several buttons, and if you want to add animations, like just custom view. So I'm not sure why this complication exists, but again, whenever you see that, not good. These kind of workarounds, they are like, I hate them. Okay, let's see what you say. How do you suggest that the data is refreshed? Yeah, inside onStart, the view still tells the view model. I agree about that. In this specific architecture, what I would suggest to do, well, at least what I do in all my applications, I just delegate onStart and onStop calls to my controllers. So controllers do not receive specific instructions. They just know when onStart and onStop are being called, and then inside the controller goes the logic that basically initializes this screen or this specific component, because you can have controller for less than just screen. So it goes there. So yeah, I just delegate onStart and onStop to controllers. Okay, I often see where people write complicated code just for the sake. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I do many times. I call it complexity fetish. Many developers, or at least some developers, non-negligible amount of developers, like complexity. Whenever they take a new library which is complex and they learn about it and then they master it, and then it gives them kind of superpower. It feels very, very empowering to take some complex library, learn it, and then use it inside your application. But then you fall into some kind of how do you call it, sunk cost fallacy. So the better approach will be probably after you realize that this library is complex, is to back off and take a step back and say, okay, that's too complex, I'm going simple, I want to do something simpler. But once you invested all this time into learning this library, you just want to use it. So that's something that I see. So I definitely agree that developers sometimes over-engineer stuff just because it looks cool. The code they used in the main activity in order to display it full screen is in order to request the whole app to be laid out edge to edge, meaning drawing behind the navigation bar, for example, so that the navigation bar doesn't appear black, for example, when using gestures. Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you for Fernando for clarification. Theoretically, with Google Lifecycle API, the delegation to controllers can be swapped with using default Lifecycle Observer plus providing Lifecycle Owner. Yes, Gabor, you can do that. I don't like Lifecycle Observers and Owners at all. I think live data has its use cases, so I can say like don't use live data. In some cases, it might be actually, well, I'd never use it, yes, but I mean, I see code that uses it, and in some cases it works out all right. But using custom lifecycles and writing lifecycle-aware components other than live data feels a little bit shaky ground to stand on. And again, I'm sure that Gabor can just 5 minutes and it's done, and there are no bugs there. But I myself would not do that because I'm not sure I can pull that off without planting some very hard to find bugs. View sends a signal and the view model does the necessary. Thanks. Yep, exactly. Basically, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. When you say delegate onStart and onStop to controllers, do you mean making the view model a lifecycle aware component? Well, I wouldn't do that. I will just delegate onStart and onStop. But again, do whatever works for you, whatever rocks your boat. What do you prefer instead of live data, RX, Flow, or do you not use that type of architecture? I don't use RX, never. Well, I mean, I worked with RX because it was incorporated in some of the code bases that I worked in, but in my personal project, never used that. And actually recommend my clients not to use that. RX is dying technology, and I know that some of you out there, RX fans, you're really angry right now because I called it dying technology, but don't be emotionally attached to libraries, frameworks, and languages, first of all. But second of all, it is dying. Okay, so there's no place for RX in Kotlin world, and Android is going to Kotlin world. So maybe Flow will replace it. I don't know about that, but RX is not something that you should adopt today. If your project already uses RX, yeah, by all means, don't refactor everything. Don't go for months of refactoring just because RX is not popular anymore. But I wouldn't recommend to adopt it for new projects today. And well, I don't hate RX. Again, I don't associate feelings with frameworks and libraries. I just don't think that the trade-offs of using RX justify the additional complexity and the additional time that it takes all the developers on the that's the problem. You can be RX expert. You already invested all that time, and you can write really short, beautiful, efficient, amazing RX code, but only you can understand that. So all other developers and future developers on that project, once they onboard, they will need to learn RX to exactly the same degree that you knew when you wrote this beautiful, amazing code. And that's something that takes a lot of time. And as we go forward, the amount of developers that actually know RX will only reduce, not grow. So yeah, at some point, people will look at code bases that contain RX just like they look at code bases that contain async tasks today. And there are a lot of code bases that contain async tasks today. If you think that it's kind of not used anymore, well, okay, I will stop reading comments because you write many comments and it will just be, I won't get to all of them. All right, so now I realize why they need this on restore instance state. As I told you, not very good approach. I would work really hard to avoid that. And I'm 100% sure that there is a way to avoid that. Maybe not using the libraries that are being used here, but that's not needed. I implemented bottom navigation, never had to do this kind of workarounds. Okay, and there's this on activity result callback, and the question is like, where is this activity even started? So let's just start activity. Sorry, no, nothing here. Okay, let's try to reverse engineer that. If handle errors coming from Firebase authentication, e.g. user cancels flow. Okay, so there's Firebase authentication and it probably starts its own activity. I never worked with Firebase authentication, so I have no clue how it works. And yep, in some cases it can be cancelled and we want to do something. I just wonder where is the authentication is started. No. Well, anyway, somewhere Firebase authentication is being kicked off, and when your user cancels authentication, we come here and we show some snack bar message. By the way, that's an interesting logic. I don't like that. Okay, so they basically say response is that they basically extract response data from this intent, and this intent is nullable by itself. That's basically the construct of on activity result, so you can't do anything about that. But then why would you why, I mean, Kotlin allows you to make your code kind of null safe. Not really, it's not null safe. You'll never be able to make your code null safe, but at least you can leverage its capabilities to write code that is not riddled with null checks. And you can do that in Java too, but in Java you don't have compiler. You need to basically rely on convention. But in Kotlin you actually have compiler support, so use it. And in this case, for some reason, that's their method. No, that's not their method, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Take everything back. And no, you know what? I don't take everything back. Even if you use a third-party library and this library exposes nullable stuff, you don't have to allow this stuff to riddle your own code base. You can somehow write a wrapper and maybe inside the wrapper do that. Something, but you don't have to do that, because when I look at that, I'm saying, wait a second. So if there is a response and the response has an error, then I show this message. But like, should I maybe show this some kind of toss of snack bar, maybe default snack bar when there's a response but it doesn't have an error? And what does it mean to have a response? Like, it makes all these questions pop up immediately. So I would say, again, I'm not sure that I'm correct in this example, because that's not their method. This comes from Firebase UI, Firebase authentication, something. But in general, I would say if you use Kotlin, like, try to avoid doing that. In some cases you can't. In some cases you need to use double exclamation mark. That's okay, but just see that you get the benefits of Kotlin. See that you use Kotlin as it's supposed to be used, and not, because that's just null checks. Here, 1, 2, 3 null checks, like in one single method. Why? All right. Now let's actually start reviewing. Let me see. Okay, we're 1 hour in and I haven't even gotten to anything interesting right now. Well, we will do maybe an additional 30 minutes. Additional 30 minutes. I don't want to make it too long. And then we'll probably do part 2. Right, where was that? Where was this dirty call to view model? Yeah, that's one. So whenever, basically, there are 2 interactions with view model. This subscription and this. This looks like a passive stuff. This looks like view model at some point will basically notify this activity that it needs to show dialog, and the activity will show dialog. So that's not a problem. Here's the problem. That's where basically activity starts the flow inside view model. So the flow of the screen starts inside its view layer. And by the way, activities are not views and fragments are not views. And Google knows about that. Basically, both Ian Lake and who was the second one? I forgot who was that. Well, several Googlers on stage already said at different conferences that fragments are not views, and, well, by extension, activities are not views, surely. But still, for some reason, this Google's MVVM architecture uses activities and fragments as views. And if you try to do that, then at some point you will need to implement this kind of dirty stuff. So that's the function that activity calls. And we go view model scope launch. Okay, that's coroutine. And view model scope is just a coroutine scope that's being cancelled, if I'm not mistaken, when view models uncleared will be called. So this scope lives for as long as basically the logical scope of the screen is alive. And inside, by the way, I'm pretty sure that the dispatcher of this scope is main dispatcher. So this executes on UI thread. And whenever this refresh conference data is called, we call to refresh conference data use case. By the way, I absolutely hate this notation in Kotlin. It's so confusing. It kills me. It just kills me. But again, maybe I'm not using Kotlin enough, or maybe I'm just old and grumpy. That's also a possibility. Basically, the notation is that you can just write like the reference to the class, and then it will invoke the function inside this class, like invoke the behavior of this class. It's like my Java mind just dies literally inside when I see that. All right, we have main activity view model. This inject means that it will be injected by Dagger. It will be constructed by Dagger. It depends on get user is attendee setting use case. You know, the name of this use case just suggests that it's yet another call to shared how do you call it, shared preferences. Yeah, just another call to share preferences. You don't need use cases for everything. Use cases are for specific flows, business flows. And if your business flow is just basically checking Boolean flag, putting it inside view model is totally justified, in my opinion. And then we have some themed activity delegate. I have no clue what's that, but if you have anything related to activity inside your view model, it's a problem, because like view models, they shouldn't know anything about activities. And I believe that there is no direct chain of references. I don't know what's this. Observability mod use case, and then we have some kind of a wrapper around live data that emits some theme information. Not sure why it's needed here. And probably again another workaround around view models limitation, if you ask me, just a guess, but looks like that. And then we have refresh conference data use case, and then we have analytics helper, and some Kotlin magic. And extend is basically, it means that it extends themed activity delegate. What does it fucking mean? Okay. That's where my Kotlin knowledge, that's the how do you call it? That's the limit of my Kotlin knowledge. So please, whoever knows what this means, please share that. Okay, and here inside this view model we have. Okay, now many people will get really angry, but that's just so-called Hungarian notation. Okay. So in Java world, in Android Java world, several years ago, one very prominent developer decided that we need to bring into Android community the flame war about how to call it, Hungarian notation. And basically, since then, every time we have these flame wars about whether this small m in front of Java variables is justified or not. Yeah, and in Kotlin, that's the recommended approach. That's basically this underscore is pretty much the same as m. It means that there will be another property of the same exact name, but without underscore, and that's here it is. But this one with underscore is private, and this one without underscore is visible to the outside world. And the reason you do that, because you want this private to be mutable, so you can change that, and you want this public to be unmutable, so you can so basically the clients of this class will not be able to change its value. And honestly, in this case, I think just a simple getter method that returns live data will be better. I don't like this convention. Having two values, it's kind of confusing. So just a single method, you have this private internal variable, mutable live data, and a getter method that returns that as just live data. Just like you would do in Java if you wouldn't have these kind of delegates. Again, just my opinion. Not sure many people will agree with that. Okay, so whenever this view model is initiated, is constructed, we immediately launch some coroutine and decided we need to show the user attendee dialog. Okay, so you remember in main activity we can get this and show dialog. So the logic that basically decides that is started whenever view model is constructed, the moment view model is constructed. And again, I would say that this logic should start on start, following on start, and not following the construction of view model. Just my opinion. And you go to this get user is attended settings use case, data, let, that's if I'm not mistaken, I know that's something, yeah, that's just call to shared preferences. So you could basically just replace all of that with just single call to shared preferences. And data, let, and then you say when it's no answer, then you want to emit, you want to show user attended dialog action, and otherwise you want to log some event to your analytics. You know, it's like what's written here is just basically if shared preferences they don't get something equals that, do that. That's all it is. Again, don't extract complex constructs, additional abstractions levels, if all you want to do is to check one single value from shared preferences. Really, it's not needed. And let's discuss a little bit the architectural aspect of that. So we have view model, which is supposed to kind of hold business logic. So it should be in control of whatever flow happens on that screen. And at this point here, we already understand that we want to show some kind of a dialogue to the user, right? We want to show a dialogue. So if I would use standalone controller, be it MVP, MVC, whatever, if I would use standalone controller, I would basically write here, something like that. Navigation, dialogues navigator, show this one. That will be all, and that will complete this flow. I evaluate condition, I will write it in simpler terms, and then I will show dialogue, because that's what controllers do. They control the flow. Views should not control the flow. But since showing a dialogue involves context, view models should not have references, even transitive references to context. So you cannot have a reference to this kind of dialogue navigator inside this view model. By the way, you can, but I don't want to get into that. You can do that without references to context. Hint, for example, using event bus. And please be careful with event buses, but you can do that. Anyways, in this implementation, since you need context, what developers decided to do is to basically delegate this call, even though at this point you already know that you want to show dialogue. Still, what they do is delegating this call to activity. And in order to delegate this one single call to activity, they had to do that. And inside activity, you need to do that. So all this code, all this complexity, all this mutable live data, live data, and what not, all of that is just in order to replace one single method call. And that's the same limitation. As I told you, this call that it is here inside kind of view layer is why I don't use view model architectural component, because the root cause of this problem, of all this complexity, is the fact that view models cannot have even transitive references to context. So if you accidentally, without knowing, inject maybe analytics helper, let's say analytics helper, well, analytics helper is probably a global class, it's kind of a singleton. But let's say one of these classes is not singleton, it's not global, and you inject it and it has a reference to activity context, then it would constitute a memory leak. You have tools, think lint checks to help you to identify, to catch them, but it's still a risk. And since you don't want to do that, whatever action requires context, you need to delegate it somewhere else. So in this case, they delegated back to activity, and activity is the view, and now it's view's responsibility to show the dialog, even though at this point inside your flow of control, you already know that you want to show the dialog, and it will take you just one single method call to do that. Okay. And the reason for that is, again, I have an article about view model back again when it was just released. I reviewed it. I saw the complexity and I told myself there's no way it will be better. And now, well, you see, it's a problem. It's a problem. This view model, it doesn't do anything. It receives calls. It receives instructions from view, and then whenever it wants to actually do something, it again delegates that action to the view. So basically you have all your code inside activity, but all of that is kind of doing this roundabout through view model for some reason. At this point, I would just basically write the same code inside activity, and it will be much easier and more maintainable. And again, this view model, let's see. Yeah, this view model doesn't preserve any kind of state. So, you know, like all this, I often get this pushback that developers tell me, wait, Vasily, wait a second, but view model, they are preserved on configuration changes. And I say, well, when do you really need that? And in most cases, you don't. So in this case, you don't need that either. Not good. So that's the view model. It doesn't do anything, really. It doesn't do anything. It just checks here one single Boolean flag and then reports some analytics. And here, refresh conference data use case. Sorry, it does something. And it delegates to this refresh conference data use case, and it launches a coroutine for that. So this will have, God. Yeah, this use case also extends this use case. So you can't even understand what's going on here. But what I guess this base class has a suspending function, right? Has a suspend operator fun invoke, and this suspending function, it receives coroutines dispatcher, some coroutine dispatcher through constructor, and then this coroutine dispatcher invokes on basically inside the coroutine that called this invoke method. They will switch context to this coroutine dispatcher and then execute this execute method that specific use cases need to extend. And then basically they need to return results. Okay, and really this result is sealed class, which is alright, by the way. Using sealed classes for delivering results of computation in coroutines world is super convenient. It's very good. But okay, please note that this structure is rigid. So it has one single data for success, one single exception for error, and loading state. And what if your use case needs to return 2 or 3 or 5 different types of data, or it has different types of successes or different types of errors? It's too rigid. It's not scalable. It's over-engineered. I mean, look at this complexity. I mean, this refresh conference data use case, I want to just come here and see what it does, right? That's like totally reasonable expectation to look into the class and understand the flow that it executes. Instead, I'm just like, what does it do? Okay, now I know that this execute will be called on this coroutine dispatcher, default dispatcher. And default dispatcher is probably background, some kind of background dispatcher. So it will do repository refresh cache with remote conference data, and then return true. Yeah, oh god. Okay, so there's a lot of complexity here, but eventually they want to call this method on a background thread. That's all that it does. And we have this conference data repository, and we have refresh cache with remote conference data. What will it do? Well, first of all, by the way, whenever you have that, that's probably should be called on background thread. So this function, that's not suspending function. So we are already not in, we are not in coroutines world anymore. We're not in suspending world anymore. So I will just put here this worker thread annotation to let myself and future developers understand that this should be called on a background thread. Don't accidentally call it on a, okay, and here we have conference data equals try get remote conference data. That's network conference data source. Okay, I believe that it goes to the network and fetches something from the network. God, there's a lot of how do you call it? A lot of indirection in this code, and there's this saying, popular saying that says there is no problem in computer science hard enough that it can't be solved with additional levels of indirection, basically additional levels of abstraction. And that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek saying, because if you use levels of abstraction where they're not required, well, you end up with very complex and very hard to read code. And this code is something simple, okay? Refresh cache with remote conference data. I believe that they want to fetch data from network, store it in some kind of a cache locally. That's all. I'm not sure why you need all of that. So let's suppose that this goes to network, and okay, hopefully there was no exception. If there was an exception, then we will throw it. Notify change observer. What's that? Data last updated channel offer. Okay, that's Kotlin channels, and for all purposes, that's just observer design pattern implementation, and some clients can basically subscribe and be notified when data changes. Let's suppose that it, by the way, it throws exception. I'm just very interested. Yeah, and here they catch exception, and so basically every call to this repository should be wrapped in try catch. I don't think it's a good approach, really. I don't think like catch here and catch one level up. It's just try catch all the way up. It's very similar to Java, where you would have null checks all everywhere. So like null check, or some case in Java, like people don't like checked exceptions. I like them very much, by the way, but some people don't like it because they're often abused. So you would have like SQL exception thrown from some low-level database stuff, and then people would like, well, we don't know what to do with SQL exception, so let's just propagate it up, and then you have like a stack of 10 abstractions, each of them dealing with these SQL exceptions, or maybe throwing it up the stack, and that's really not good. But here we see the same approach pretty much implemented in Kotlin. Everything is exception, and exceptions are rethrown, and they are called on each level of abstraction. I think it can be simplified greatly. I don't think it's a good approach. And then we say if conference data is null, then okay, this shouldn't happen in Kotlin world. That's basically using exception for flow of control. And I do it sometimes I do it in Java, because in Java you don't have sealed classes. You have enums, you can use enums, or you can design your own classes that can be used as error or success, but then it becomes tricky very quickly. But in Kotlin you have sealed classes. And once you have sealed classes, you have really no reason to use exceptions for flow of control. So if this method should basically maybe return just a sealed class, and inside this sealed class specify whether like it was empty result or it returned result or failure, etc. And then you don't need exceptions, you don't need this. That's really not something that you should write in Kotlin. And I'm not Kotlin expert by any means, like really not. But you even in Java, I would say that that's like a very questionable approach. But in Kotlin, you don't do that. And by the way, what's interesting is that they save latest exception. For some, they say latest exception. They say just for testing. Once again, like you should not, generally speaking, like in 99% of cases, you should not write production code just for the sake of testing. Yes, sometimes here and there you should do that, but generally speaking, you should not do that. And in this case, in my estimation, that will be totally avoidable. So they save this latest exception to be able to inspect it in tests. Why? Like why? And network data success, update cache. Okay, so all of that is just one single API call and check for whether it's successful or failure. And then finally we say synchronized. Okay. And then we update this conference data cache, and then we call to populate search data. It's basically construct some entities, but I would update meta. Okay, some kind of update. But what I want to dive in, let's see if I have time. I have 10 minutes. Okay, for the remaining 10 minutes, let's do it like that. I will read some of your comments. Well, you write a lot, guys. By the way, I'm really happy that you're so engaged. I wasn't sure what will come out of this code review. I thought that it will be me and myself, and we will do code review together. Okay, let's see. I'm not starting, like, probably I missed 100 comments. Let's see. Latest exception, Gabor said. That's odd. Yeah, I also found it odd. As you saw, it's just for testing. Not necessary. Non-suspending function can still be called in a coroutine. Non-suspending function, yes, indeed, non-suspending function can be called in coroutine. Annotating the function with worker thread takes the execution back to the UI thread. No, as far as I know, this annotation doesn't do anything except for hinting that this function should be called on background thread. And then there are some tools like lint and maybe other static checkers that they have some heuristics to help violations. So for example, if you call this from UI thread, then they would tell you, well, look, you've got this method, you say that it should be called on worker thread, but you call it from UI thread. That's probably a bug. And no, I don't think that this annotation changes the behavior in any way. I lost it. Okay, this is actually very nice. I would love more but on focus topics. Well, thank you. I'm not sure what focus topics are. Calling a non-suspend function from a coroutine won't have any effect on the task to be executed by the non-suspend function. Probably. Won't have any effect. Didn't get this. Try catch, too bad though. The task will be on the dispatcher thread is specified for the coroutine. Yes, it will absolutely will. Yeah, it will absolutely will. This is called from refresh conference data use case. And this use case will be called on this dispatcher. You saw it's in the implementation of this base use case class, all this complex logic there. So this goes to a background thread. And since this method, background thread from this default dispatcher, and since this method is blocking basically, right? Yeah, probably it's blocking, unless some of these, yeah, it must be blocking, otherwise it wouldn't, it's blocking. Since this method is blocking, it will basically allocate to itself one thread from default dispatcher. And if I'm not mistaken, default dispatcher, if they use default of coroutines, it contains just the num of processors. So if your phone has 2 processors, just by calling that, you basically already consumed one of them, and hopefully you don't do any other blocking calls concurrently, because then you consume both of them, and then your UI thread starts to be starved a little bit. Depends on the load. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why in my multi-threading course, when I come to coroutines, I absolutely recommend you don't use default dispatcher. That's a mistake. You should not limit your concurrency to the number of cores by default. Use IO dispatcher. By the way, let's check that. I want to see where this dispatcher comes from. So I probably need to find some kind of a module. Too much. How can I find that? Let's see if I have some module classes here. Basically, modules are Dagger's composition roots that Dagger use. Well, can I just not project production files? Is there a non-annotated stuff? Yeah, let's limit it to module mobile. God, kills me. Forgot. In Dagger Android, modules are probably nested classes, inner classes, so I won't find them like that. Let's search for this default dispatcher. Coroutines module. Yeah, here you. No, it's a standalone. Why didn't you find that? Never mind. So default dispatcher is exactly, yes, it's dispatcher default. And let's read documentation. This bucket shared pool of threads. By default, the maximum level of parallelism used by this is equal to the number of CPU cores, but is at least 2. So if you have if your users have devices with just 2 cores, then by calling this remote conference data, this refresh cache which is not non-suspending function, you basically already consumed one of them. And that's these are IO calls. These are IO calls, but still this thread. I'm sorry. You consumed one thread. You did not consume one core. But in this case, since the dispatcher is limited to just 2 threads, then you consumed one of the threads from the dispatcher, so it's remained with just one. And again, I recommend you that you use IO dispatcher, this one, for everything, unless you know that you specifically want to limit your concurrency. And the use cases for limiting concurrency are very limited by themselves. Basically, in most applications, you will not need to do that. So what else did you write, guys? Let's see. I think the repo should throw the exception and they should be able to catch it. They should absolutely not have to save it as a field. Well, probably yes, maybe, not sure. I mean, if you have sealed classes, why would you want to throw exception? If it's a void method, if I see. Yeah, that's a void method. Well, maybe I should take back what I said. That's a void method, so it doesn't return anything. It just does something. But no, I would still use sealed classes. I wouldn't rely on exceptions. No, I wouldn't rely on exceptions. Because these are not exceptional conditions. Again, this is not an error. The fact that there is no conference data, maybe there is no conference data. Maybe I don't know, the user doesn't have the authorization required to basically view this data, or maybe there's just no conference data, just all. That's not an exception. That's just empty response. So, not sure why would you treat that as exceptional condition and not as empty response. Again, maybe I missed something about the business requirements here, so I'm talking from the top of my head. I'm having a tequila shot every time you say that you don't like Kotlin, my liver. Yeah, Eric, be strong. Interesting that they have a global data cache. It goes against the idea that I explained regarding using view model as a cache and otherwise return data from room as live data. Yes, global data cache, like, let's see actually where they put it. Conference data cache. So that's private var and the conference or offline. And offline got offline conference data. Offline data comes from get cache or bootstrap data and populate search. Guys, there's this thing called CQS. Yeah, CQS, command query separation. It's a very simple design rule that makes your code so much better, like super better. It says the following: you have commands, which are methods that do something that have side effects, and you have queries, which are methods that don't have side effects but return data. And CQS says separate them. Command query separation. Separate. Have methods that have side effects and do stuff, and methods that return data. And this one is basically the violation of CQS. It says that you also return data and you also have some side effects. And that's not a very good design. It's very problematic. And anyway, like, why would you want to populate search here? It immediately brings a lot of questions. Why would you want in one single method cache or bootstrap data and populate cache? Yeah, and populate search, sorry. But that's probably comes from database, this get cache or bootstrap. Remote data source, get offline conference data. Yes, another level of abstraction. Okay, so there's like data source and we have two implementation, network and bootstrap. What's bootstrap? Load and parse bootstrap data, that's here. Java class loader, get bootstrap, conf data, file name, open stream, parse conf. Okay, so they bundle some kind of a data, like default data with this application, and before they can fetch something from the network, they show some static data. And to do that, we have all that complexity, like this conference data source and two different implementations. Phew, you just want to do API colon retrofit, and then you want to do call on some object which will be named like get static conference data. That's all. I will read that code. It will be immediately clear what it does. I wouldn't need to go down several levels of abstraction to understand what's going on here. So no, there's no database here, or maybe not in this case, probably maybe for other use cases, but for this one they use either static or from the network. You are not alone, lol. Yeah, I'm really glad I'm not. It will be a failure of an epic scale if I will just start a live stream and then sit here alone waiting for you guys to come and no one would come. Then I will drink something, surely. Now try with every time he says, I don't like this X, you'll drop that. Yeah. Well, by the way, that's an important point. My personality is that I'm immediately drawn to bad stuff, to non-optimal stuff, and that's kind of personality, and that's kind of professional. That's what I do, like when I have client. Lately I am doing mostly consulting, so I have a code base. They ask me to take a look, to suggest something, and therefore I need to jump in very quickly, understand what's going on, and see the problems. And I don't have time to kind of, like 200,000 lines of code application. Like, it will take me months to understand exactly what's going on there and which flows it implements, etc. I don't have that time. So I need to work with patterns. I need to find these places where, critical places where something is not optimal, and propose solutions. So this probably makes me biased towards negative criticism. So just keep that in mind. Not everything about this application is bad. But yeah, I don't like it. Go on for another shot, Eric. Please clarify with context why activities and fragments are not views. Well, I have an entire talk. I gave it at DroidCon Berlin a couple of years ago. So just go and watch that. Very detailed. I laid it out there. Sometimes you actually do throw exception, very bad happen, even Kotlin, when you don't want to use a sealed class. It depends. Yes, I agree. It's not a clear cut. Sometimes you want exception. Yep, checked exceptions are transformed to sealed classes, while unchecked fatal panic are still here. CQRS, not exactly CQRS, if I'm not mistaken. CQRS is something about backend architecture that, Greg Young, not CQRS, CQS. They are similar, but they are very different. If you read about CQRS, your mind might melt. Don't do that. You don't need that. Well, I mean, you can use it in Android, and I use it in Android in some cases, especially when I have to implement offline functionality. So, like, if you want to read about CQRS, go do that. But what I meant is CQS without R. But in cases like that, if you need to do an action and get the result, do we simply call them in sequence? Yes. And especially with coroutines, which, in Java, in some cases, you need to go into some, to do some multi-threading magic to write your code sequentially. You need to kind of know how to do that. It takes practice, it takes some knowledge. In Kotlin with coroutines, like, that's why would you want to use them? If you don't use that, don't use coroutines. You don't need them. They are too complex. By the way, coroutines is the most complex multi-threading framework that I ever worked with. So if you want to learn coroutines, go on, but learn them properly. They're really complex. But in cases like that, I thought I wrote some overly complicated code, but this is some crazy stuff. Well, it's not the most complicated code that I saw. Maybe the use case abstraction was a bit too much. I saw base classes for use cases before that, but I've never seen it implemented that way. So, but otherwise, it's not overly complex. Well, we should also remember that it's relatively small application that is written on a very short during a very short period of time, and it's not maintained, so it's not like there are many changes here. You are doing awesome job supporting Vasily by providing links and extra information, finding coders you like so fast, and posting appreciated. Yes, Gabor, thank you very much. And again, if you'd like to do code review, like participate, discuss, it would be honor for me. I would learn many things from you, I'm sure. Don't be annoyed. To me, I'm annoyed. Well, maybe a little bit. I don't like complexity. Happy to be here. Yeah, thank you, Gabor. Yes, exactly. Sorry, not secure SQS. Yes, Gabor, is that the type of guy to help you to come out of nowhere? I will look for random stuff on GitHub and surprise, who answered it? Gabor. Yep. Well, I met. How much time do we have, guys? Well, we're already past time, so I will take 10 minutes. Okay, let's summarize what we managed to do right now. First of all, we reviewed this launcher activity, and then we saw that it's basically checking the value of some shared preference value. And then we discussed the importance of having standardized approach to your presentation layer. So even if you have one line of code inside your view model or other controller, in my opinion, that's justified because you want to have it standardized. But don't go extra mile, don't add additional abstractions if you have just one single line of code. And then we saw the implementation of main activity, which is basically like main activity is the controller here. Why can't I find it? So main activity is basically functions as a controller. So it initiates basically the flow, and then whenever the dialog needs to be shown, it shows that. So yeah, this view model, it doesn't do much. And the only thing really that this main activity view model does is calling this refresh conference data use case. But please note that it doesn't even do anything with that. So basically, like view, like main activity directly controls the execution of this use case, and the results are not even used inside this view model. So like, I find it hardly justified. Like we've seen 2 view models so far, and I find it really hard to justify the existence of both of them. So probably we will do another session, another code review to kind of dive a little bit deeper, because I believe that we haven't seen any screen, we haven't seen anything important and interesting, and I believe that there should be some kind of interesting logic inside this application. So we'll probably do another one. And just for the last 5 minutes, I will tell you that if you want to be good Android developers, invest some time into social media. So Reddit is great. I kind of get to know Gabor on Reddit primarily, but then we met once at a conference. And Twitter is great. So use them, but I personally have a problem. I spend too much time on social media, and lately I started to pay attention, and I try not to engage, try to limit my participation on social media because it simply consumes too much of my time. So be aware of that. But definitely, if you want to learn Reddit, Android Dev, Twitter, follow some developers, that's all good. And yeah, well, my live chat for my live stream basically turned into praising for Gabor. Yeah. Cool, guys. Yeah, Gabor did an outstanding job. No, I'm joking. I'm not envious. Yeah. By the way, I didn't ask you, Gabor, but I made you moderator, and he didn't object to that. So again, yeah, Gabor is the kind of guy that you want to have behind to keep your back, or how do you say it? Reddit takes too much time. Twitter is enough. Yeah, if you engage on Reddit, if you can just kind of read and go, Reddit is very like dangerous place to be on, because it can consume a lot of your time. And I lately try to be very mindful about the time, how I spend it, and social media is one of the main time wasters. So folks, I'm really glad that you've been there. I wasn't sure that anyone would want to watch that, and thanks for keeping such a good vibes in chat and bringing these topics. Hopefully I will have a time maybe next week to do another one. We'll see how it goes. Feel free to ping me on social media. Just let me know what was good, what was bad, especially the bad stuff, because okay, I realize that maybe telling me some good things is very nice, but if there's anything to be improved, just say it. I don't take feedback personally, and it helps me improve, so just go ahead, whatever it is. I can't change my accent. I tell you it like right away. So probably I can spare you that. Don't tell me about my accent. It's what it is. And again, thank you very much. It was really cool. Hopefully it helped you. Hopefully you learned something. And now you have some resources to explore and learn about. Thank you very much. It was a big pleasure for me. Until next time, goodbye.